joining us on stage. I'm going to very briefly introduce you, although really neither of them needs an introduction. I am joined here on stage, wonderful, yeah, by Olia Hercules, celebrated British-Ukrainian chef, author, and cultural ambassador, and the woman whose food you are enjoying tonight. So, Olia, thank you for all of those. In collaboration with Dniester Restaurant. And Felicity Spector, TV journalist, author, and tireless volunteer. In fact, when I was checking with her how to introduce her best, I said, can I call you a tireless volunteer? And she said, well, yes, you can, but I'm pretty tired. So, yeah, a tireless volunteer, I think it sounds familiar to many, many of you. And we'll be discussing these absolutely fabulous books by these two wonderful women. Can I ask you to take the mics, please, so they can be out of the way? And I assume you will each get a copy after the discussion and get it signed as well by the authors, because they are amazing. They are absolutely remarkable books. We'll have some time for questions from the audience, and those of you who are joining us on Zoom, please type your questions in chat, and Aidan here will help me deliver those questions to our speakers. But first, I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the books and about stories around the books. Olia, let me begin with you. You've written lots of books. I think most of us here have your books in our kitchens and have given them as wonderful gifts to people. Your books are full of color, they're vibrant, they are celebrating culture, your own, but also other nations' cultures. This one is very different. It's also full of food. It's full of stories about food. It's full of color too, but it's also full of pain. And with that pain, hope and this quiet resilience. Tell us, please, how this book came to you.
First of all, thank you so much for everything that you do at Ukrainian Institute, all of you, your brilliant team. And thank you, honestly, I feel like Mamushka was a bestseller because each one of you probably bought about 10 each. You know, each Ukrainian person bought like loads of presents, and that's how it became a bestseller. So thank you all. How did this book come about? I actually had the idea almost 10 years ago, just about almost 10 years ago, when the war actually broke out in Ukraine. Even before I wrote Mamushka, I just thought, or maybe during the time that I was writing Mamushka, I was writing the recipes and then I was writing the captions, and I just thought, wouldn't it be so amazing to extend those little stories, you know, the little intros to the recipes that I had, because my kind of mission from then on, even before I published my first cookbook, I just thought, I've been in the UK by that time about 10 years, and people didn't know much about Ukraine at all. That's why I think Mamushka came about. The agent that messaged me, she just said, we see the headlines, but we don't know anything about Ukrainians, what they're like, what they eat, what they do. So that's how the cookbook came about, but I thought, oh, I'd really love to expand on that and to tell them the real story, you know, like to go deep into it. So I went to my mom and I said, I think I'm ready to write our family story. And my mom was like, no, you're not. So she said, you're 30 now, wait at least 10 years. I'm going to be 41 in July, in a couple of weeks. She knew what she was talking about. Next week, actually. Yeah, and she said, wait for it. But, so I thought, okay, that's fair enough. But I started collecting, I've already grown up with loads of stories from my family, but then I just started recording their voices, kind of just building up on all of it. So it's 10 years in the making, really. And I also started learning a lot about Ukraine. I'm from the south of Ukraine, I'm from Khersonshina, and Kherson and eastern and northern Ukraine were really quite heavily Russified. So, you know, my first language was Russian. I started speaking Ukrainian 2 years ago, really. That's when my first Ukrainian thought came into my head. But I really worked really hard on it. Can I ask you what the thought was? I wish that it was more like powerful or romantic. Maybe it is. I don't know. I just read Olesya Khromeychuk's Boyarinya.
Oh, yes.
And I was chopping some vegetables. I was cooking.
Angrily, presumably.
And the thought was, and it was very 19th century language, I think, like Olesya Khromeychuk's language. It was like, як се може бути?
Yeah, that's a good
Як
idea.
се
Yeah,
може
that makes
бути?
sense.
And that was the first thing that popped into my head. So yeah, so it's been long in the making, and then when the full-scale invasion happened, I thought, okay, it really is time now. And thankfully, my publisher of my cookbooks, you know, when I came to them with the idea, well, actually, I went to quite a lot of publishers with the idea, but my publisher was like, no, let's do it.
Very good. We'll come back to those stories and those characters. You describe seeing ghosts, you describe seeing faces of your relatives coming to speak to you. It's a very vivid description in that book. I'd like to talk to you more about it. Felicity, you're not Ukrainian, except you do have roots in Dnipro before it was known as Dnipro. Your grandparents came from there. But your dedication to Ukraine, especially over the last 3 years, is absolutely remarkable. And the story of the mobile bakery, which you described in Bread and War, is just astonishing. I would really like you to share the history of the mobile bakery. I didn't know about it, the prehistory, where it originated, and also give us an update on where it's now. I think it's on, I think. Graham, is it on? Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for having me as well. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's so wonderful to see so many people here and everything. So Bake for Ukraine, which is the very small non-profit which I've been helping out ever since I first met them in early 2022. The founder, one of the co-founders of the group, they're all from Odessa, and Maria Kalenska was living in Berlin, and they immediately started trying to fundraise and do what they could to send whatever everyone needed in Ukraine at the time. There was all sorts of, you know, clothing, food, supplies, everything. And she found this friend who had a mobile bakery in Berlin, and they let her use it to make palinitsa bread and sell it in this lovely market in the center of Berlin, and all the money they then could send on to whoever needed it back home. And these mobile bakeries were originally from the Swiss Army in the 1960s, and each battalion had its own mobile bakery. And I mean, the Swiss have no war, do they? So they might as well just make croissants or something. So yeah, one of the soldiers...
Palinitsa, they should learn to make palinitsa.
Yeah, now they can, but obviously I don't know what they made, kind of rolls, I suppose, baguettes. But yeah, they had... One of the soldiers' jobs was to make bread on board these mobile bakeries. For some reason, a bunch of them were donated to Ukraine about 30 years ago. Most of them were chopped up, and people kept they have big ovens on board. Everything is self-contained. They have generators, water supply, a mixer, big dough mixer, space for the bread to proof, and these 3 big deck ovens. And obviously, most of the people who got them didn't really want them to be that mobile. They just have had them in their backyard, and then after a while, they just sort of like let them fall into disrepair and took the ovens, which were the thing that they wanted, and left the rest. And Maria was determined to find one that was still functioning, so that she thought this would be an ideal solution to some of the food security problems, especially in these regions which don't have much access to electricity and so on. And she spent every day looking on sort of, you know, Olix and all these websites to try and find one for sale. And eventually one came up. And it was in Izmail, which isn't that far from Odessa, so it seemed destined. And I did some fundraising here on a Just Giving platform, and we raised all the money, $17,000 in 3 days. And off I went to Ukraine with it to buy this mobile bakery. And it's still working away. We had to do some repairs and so on. It was in Odessa for a while, and now it's in Mykolaiv. And it's in this amazing volunteer hub at this place called the DOF Center, which is Dom Officerski Flot or something. It's this old army building that's now being used by volunteers. And they have really taken it on board. And we've had 2 bakers who've gone out, one from London, one from Belgium, who are volunteers already in Ukraine, and they have helped to train 8 volunteers now, maybe a few more. So there are plenty of people in this DOF place that know how to make the sourdough bread on board. And they make 2 kinds of bread. They make a white palinitsa sourdough and then a rye some part rye, part whole wheat bread. And some organisations, Gale's Bakery and a few other people, donated bread tins so we can make them in these tins. And they're really lovely. It's fantastic bread. I went there the other week, and they were very proud of this bread, and it was really excellent quality, and it keeps really well, so that when you're going to a village maybe only once a week, and they try to go to villages in, most of them in Mykolaiv region and a couple in the west of Kherson region, which is possible to get to still. But they're all down terrible roads, and a lot of the bigger volunteer groups don't go there. So they try to go to these places where people have gone back home and just don't have any shops or any access to anything fresh. And so this bread will keep for a good 5 or 6 days.
It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, the stories that you describe in your book, how everybody chips in, how on the way they meet others who contribute to that project. It's fascinating. It really shows you that community feeling that you have, both of Ukrainians and people like yourself who come to Ukraine to help. You go every couple of months or so, extremely frequently, and to some of the least accessible areas in Ukraine. It's fantastic. Your book is about bread. Ukraine has been long known as a bread basket of Europe. It's a sort of, the kind of one of the stereotypical images of Ukraine. But of course, when Russia started its full-scale invasion, everybody realized just how important it is beyond Europe as well, how the food produced in Ukraine affects global economics, but also global food security. Do you think people understand that now, 3 years into the full-scale war?
I'm not sure they do, because there's two sides to it. There's obviously the problem the Ukraine has with some of the land is occupied, some is mined. There's all these issues with getting grain out of the ports, because obviously Odessa is attacked most nights, and Ismail and these other Danube ports are also attacked. And then on the other side, you've got Russia, which is not only stealing crops from the occupied territories, but also is trying to muscle in on the market and undercut other global providers so that they can then sell grain and take the rewards, the monetary rewards. So you've got those two sides of it, and they very deliberately attack agricultural assets in Ukraine. They mine, there's a special way that they drop mines that scatter over agricultural fields, and then they've obviously been attacking other parts of the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, and so on, and railway. Just yesterday you could see attacking a passenger train, but a lot of freight trains have also been hit. And it's a very deliberate strategy to try and undermine Ukraine's ability to export not only grain, but things like sunflower oil, which I think is half the world's supply is from Ukraine. But they've managed, and it's amazing, I think the amount of exports is only about 10% lower than it is normally before the war. So somehow, with the usual getting
Ukrainian
around.
ingenuity.
Exactly, they've worked out. I mean, when the grain agreement was cancelled by Russia, the Ukrainians just said, oh, screw it, we're just going to take the boats anyway. Let's just carry on and see what they do about it. And that's how it's carried on.
Yeah, fascinating. Olia, you described the region you're from with such beautiful emotion. It's the south of Ukraine, and it has been hit really hard by occupation, by brutal bombardment, daily bombardment. And it's not only the people who are suffering, it's nature as well. You've spoken really powerfully about the unfolding ecocide, especially in that region, but all over Ukraine. What would you like people to know about it?
So, my birthplace is Kakhovka. I was born there in 1984. And my parents are from Mykolaiv region, where the bakery is now, actually, so south of Ukraine. And the Kakhovka Dam has been there my whole life, and I just looked at it like, it's just one of the normal landmarks. In fact, every time I'd come back from the UK and I'd be driving from the Kherson train station, the minute that I see the dam, I'm like, okay, I'm 20 minutes away from my mom and her dumplings. That kind of like, it was just a really warm feeling about it. And then when the war, when the full-scale invasion happened, the Russians immediately took over the dam and the hydroelectric station, the Kakhovka hydroelectric station. And they mined it. And we knew that they mined it. My parents left. Luckily, I've convinced them to leave in April 2022. And then in June 2023, they blew it up. I don't think they meant to blow it up as much as they did. Maybe they did, who knows? But they're also not very bright, I think, the people that were managing it. So they blew up the dam and caused an unimaginable catastrophe. There were images of families stuck on the roof because it just flooded all of the new Kakhovka, which is a little bit up. This is when they built the new town. I'm from Old Kakhovka. Some endemic animals and plants were, half of them were just completely perished. My parents' house was by the reservoir kind of river, and when the dam blew up, the water actually receded. So now, and everybody was saying like, oh, there will be nothing, once the water recedes, there will be no life, but actually, the Dnieper has gone to its original shores and nature prevails. So there's one positive thing that's coming out of it. There's actually a willow forest now by my parents' house. We can't get to it because my hometown is still occupied. But the nature is like showing a little bit of a middle finger to Russians anyway. But the thing that I talk about in the book, so my auntie Luda, who's my blood uncle Slava, that's his wife, and she's a Kakhovchanka. She's like a multi-generational from Kakhovka. And she told me loads of stories about it. And she told me about how the Soviets came in the 1950s and built the dam. And of course, when they built the dam, because we were trying to overtake the Americans were building the big, beautiful dams, the same vibe as today. And the Soviets were like, oh, we can do better. We can build more beautiful dams and just completely, there was a whole, check it out. It's a whole policy of Stalin, the conqueror of nature. So he said, not only people are going to kneel down, nature itself, herself, is going to kneel down. So they built a cascade of dams, including the one in Kakhovka, and they've dried out loads of land in Western Ukraine, all of the natural marshes and bogs, they've dried that out to create more arable land, basically. Stupid, completely non-scientific and disastrous. So when they built the Kakhovka Dam, as I find out, as I'm writing this book, when I did my research, hundreds of villages were flooded. Thousands of people lost their homes, and of course they take them from their homes, from their land, and they put them into Khrushchevka buildings. Some people don't survive, and they move in Russians, they move in people from the outside. So yeah, so it was a disaster in the 1950s. Then nature and us kind of adjusted to whatever came, and then they did it again. So it's a kind of like a double tap and disaster, once in the 1950s and once in 2023. And yeah, it's, I grew up in Kakhovka and I always thought, oh my God, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's such an unimportant town. Nobody can even pronounce Kakhovka in the West. It's such a weird word to pronounce. And now I know, having delved into it, that it's actually has been a geopolitical, strategical point all along, because it's so close to Crimea. It's 70 miles away from Crimea.
Yeah, sadly, that is how a lot of place names in Ukraine have been learned outside of Ukraine because of this war, because Russia razes these towns and cities to the ground, and then that's when we learn about them. Let's not do that. Let's learn from wonderful books like these two and rescue these places before they are destroyed, or prevent their destruction. Olia, when I revisited your book to prepare for this conversation, I was very lucky to have read the manuscript before it was fully published, so what a privilege. And I decided to listen to your wonderful audiobook in preparation.
I listened to yours to kind of like train myself because I love yours.
Exchange compliments. It's narrated by you beautifully, but there is also a wonderful treat. There are songs by Cats and Bats, the band that is here, and Olia sings too, so another reason to purchase the audiobook. And what struck me as I was revisiting your wonderful text was that you don't shy away from being extremely vulnerable and explaining what toll this war has taken on mental health, your mental health, those of your loved ones, and not just people in Ukraine, but also the ones who find themselves abroad. There are lots of Ukrainians who have been displaced by this war in London and in this room. What would you say to them to encourage them to stay grounded? What's your trick, if you have one?
The full explanation is in the book. But for me, what helped me was, obviously I also contacted my GP and said that I was having a mental breakdown and can I please have some therapy? And after they heard the story, they were like, okay, yes, I will do it. And it did help a little bit. But actually what really helped me was to tune in to things that we were deprived of in the south of Ukraine. You know, we went to Western Ukraine in 1994. It was almost like a pilgrimage. It was Christmas, and we went to Western Ukraine, to this small village in the middle of nowhere, and at night we heard the wolves, and in the evening we heard this really beautiful brook, and in the daytime it was Christmas time, and for about a week, you know, this folk opera just kept on coming to our friend's house, and they were singing, and there was these beautiful embroidered coats and color and language and everything and songs. And for me, I will never forget that moment. And I just, at that point, I was like, oh my God, I've only seen this in like books on, the Soviet books on Gogol, you know, Gogol's books or something like that. This, you know, and I felt really connected then. But I was 9 at the time, so, you know, 1994, or 8 or 9. And during, when the full-scale invasion happened, I really wanted to tap into it back a bit more. So I started actually, I read about how Ukrainians used to decorate their houses before each holiday, painting the walls, and then I painted my door. So now it's in its 5th reincarnation. If you know about it, this tradition, basically before each holiday you paint your house, and then they say, you know, the bad spirits come, and the worlds and the flowers suck in the bad energy, and then you whitewash it again. Your beautiful artwork, you whitewash it over, and you paint it over again. And, you know, it's this regenerative, beautiful thing, something to do with nature and life. And I just realized, oh my God, Ukrainians, you know, the Russians have a bit of a death cult situation going on, and Ukrainians have a life cult. And I really tapped into that. So I started painting my door obsessively, not for anyone. It's like composition, it's, you know, whatever. And
it's very beautiful, I saw it.
But I just, you know, so I paint my door, I embroider, I spend time with my children as much as I can. I put the phone down sometimes. I try my best to actually disconnect, especially when my children come back from school, that this is really important. And I sing with my beautiful friends there, Cats and Bats, and just tapping into our beautiful cultural heritage. This is the healing. That's why our ancestors did it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, creativity, for sure. Just before I open the floor for questions, one last question from me, Felicity. I have a confession to make. I cannot bake to save mine or anybody else's lives, and my partner's here to testify to that. He's actually a very good bake. He baked your cake, Olia, a cake from your book, but I'm not. And yet, when I was reading your book, I felt very inspired to give it a go. You described so beautifully about how important bread is for Ukrainian culture. We have bread, specific bread for weddings. We have several. We have specific bread for funerals and everything in between. And there's even one that is a litmus test for Ukrainian pronunciation. Palyanytsia. Those of you who can pronounce it know what it means. Felicity, if somebody wanted to give it a try, like I am thinking of, which of the recipes, the book has recipes, by the way, at the end, which of the recipes would you recommend and why?
Well, there are just a few. There are 8 recipes from different people who are in the book. And I have to confess, I also do not make sourdough bread. It's a faff. And I don't have the time to sit at home and turn the bread every 5 hours or something. It is a beautiful process, but maybe when I'm retired I will suddenly turn to it. So we have got a bread recipe, but there are also some much simpler things. There's a beautiful cake, which isn't very difficult actually, from our friend Katria, who features also in Olia's book, who's a wonderful baker, also from Kakhovka, who now is working in Lviv. And there's a very nice plum cake with poppy seeds. Also, very nice sireniki. You can't go wrong.
Yes.
My favourite dish. I mean, nobody could get that wrong.
And if you do, it's still delicious.
Exactly,
isn't it?
yeah. It's
it might
fried
not
cheese,
look very
what
good.
could be bad, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm sure all of you will want to buy the book and go home and give it a try. Okay, questions from the audience. Yes, I can see one here. Can someone please help me with the mic? Yes, we've got one. Super. Maybe I'll collect 2. Oh, the mic is there. No. There's there's a mic right there. How about I collect a couple? So there's one in the front row, just there. No, just there, yeah.
Hello, thank you for amazing presentations. I want both books immediately. My dad is from Ismail and my mother is from Kherson, and I spent most of my childhood summers between Kherson and Nova Kakhovka, so I relate to a lot of things that you said. I just wanted to, my question is how do we connect the dots between the Ukrainian experience and the experience we are living here? Because I remember a couple of months ago, I was watching Great British Bake Off, talking about bread, and they had the bread week. And one of the participants, they were not happy with the bread that they made, and they just, in kind of act of frustration, they throw the bread on the floor. And yeah, I produced exactly the same sound. I was like, you know, how, and yeah.
You're right about that, Felicity. You're right about that in your book, yeah.
Yeah, and you understand that even, like, I grew up in the independent Ukraine and I never experienced starvation. But it is so ingrained in our culture and our bringing up. And now as the world in many places is unfortunately moving away from the security and food security as well, how do you think, how should we go around this and talking about Ukraine in the West?
Not a simple question. Would either of you like to give it a try?
First of all, on a very positive note, if you go into historical bake-off, I did a korovai there about 10 years ago with singing and everything. I probably sang quite a stupid song, but yeah.
Thank you.
So that was good. That's a positive thing. When you said that somebody threw bread on the floor, that literally my whole body just seized up, because all of our ancestors, most of our ancestors have been through Holodomor, and throwing bread away is a no-no in my house.
I think
not allowed.
For non-Ukrainians in the room, if you do that on national television in Ukraine, you'll be banned for life. You will not leave your house anymore.
In like a second. And other food, like bread, 100%, is like, it's a sacred thing. How do we convince the West? Or how do we, can you just...
Yeah, I just think how to be tied these two experiences, and should we do that at all?
Yeah, we should, and we should tell them. And we should tell them about Holodomor, and we should tell them about all of these things. And we are living in uncertain times now. And actually, even the British people who are here today, or, you know, all over the country, they've also been through hardships after the Second World War. It's just that people have been lulled into this kind of like, you know, feeling of security and feeling, oh, nothing bad can happen now, never again, etc. Well, it's happening to us, and we're feeling it so acutely because we have, you know, we feel our ancestors, and we've never been kind of completely divorced from that experience. So we just keep talking. I know that it's tiring, actually, and it's like, well, why do we have to like tell you guys that this is a really rubbish situation? But I have faith because I've seen a lot of younger people in the UK, for example, you know, there is a bit of a trend of no waste. So me as a cook or whatever, you know, whenever there's like, oh, no waste policy or whatever, and I don't just say it as a trend, and I tell them, for Ukrainians, it's not a trend. For Ukrainians, this whole like no waste policy and being, you know, conscious of the environment or whatever it is, it's not that. It's not a trend. It's literally in our blood, in our DNA. And I could never, I would like chop my arm off before I throw any bread, or even like, even if there's like crumbs, I have a bird feeder and I make sourdough bread, so I think it's not so bad for them. It's like a really nice bread. So I'd put it in the bird feeder, you know? So I just think, unfortunately, we've got so many things to do, but maybe advocating and telling people stories and exchanging and asking them and asking them to ask their parents and their grandparents. Do not forget about your experience, because actually, your ancestors have also gone through really hard times, so let's just remember that. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Felicity, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I also think that food is often a gateway for people to explore other parts of a culture. I remember meeting this lady from Crimea who had to set up twice. She first of all escaped from Crimea and then set up in Irpin and created a cafe, and then just after the full-scale invasion had to move from Irpin and set up again in Lviv. But she kept going, and she said that what she wanted to do was provide this space where people came in for Chiboruk, and then they look around and see the music and some language, Crimean language books, yeah. And then, you know, there would be events and so on. And people sort of were really interested once they had come into the place, and there were maps and pictures and all sorts of books. And, you know, it wasn't just Ukrainians who were in there, but obviously in Lviv there are still Westerners. And people were really intrigued and wanted to know more. So often, simply by talking about food to begin with, then people want to know more about history and so on. And history is such an important thing. It's because people have forgotten history or don't know it or never were taught it that we have some of the problems we're in the moment, because there's no context for anything anymore.
That's very true. And if I can abuse my position and answer your question too, what we do at the Ukrainian Institute, we try and make Ukraine relevant to the people that we talk to, and say, look, there are stories and lessons from Ukrainian history, culture that are relevant to your concerns, whether that's about democracy and the fight for it and building civil society, or, I don't know, feminism or environment or anything else. And that opens the doors, because it's about dialogue. It's about having dialogue of equals. But thank you. Any other questions? Please, this one right at the back. And please put your hands up so I can see. Yes, over there. Good. Okay.
Hi, my name is Veronica, and in the day life, I work as a journalist, so being good with words is something that pays my bills. But recently, I've been quite bad with words, and quite often finding myself being speechless and tired of talking, because I feel a little bit of a gap, you know, the bridge I'm trying to build between me and my colleagues at work, my clients at work, and everybody surrounding me. And like, I live in London now, so, you know, advocating for Ukraine is my full-time job now as well. But I see that, and I feel this discomfort when I start talking about Ukraine, when I bring up news. One of my colleagues just recently said that I shouldn't start the day with bad news about Ukraine in a group chat, when I started to talk about what happened in Kyiv overnight. And I feel comfortable for advocating for my own country, which is ridiculous. But I wanted to ask you, it's been more than 10 years of a war in Ukraine. There's been years and centuries and decades of everything that's going on in Ukraine. And I know, unfortunately, something tells me the fight with Russia will continue for a really long time. And it's something we should prepare to do for a really long time, as in keep the awareness about Ukraine and keep the talks about Ukraine alive. So my question to you guys is, what would be one advice you would give to, you know, the young professionals like me living in London, how to keep this legacy about Ukrainian life, how to keep the words being spread, but still probably, you know, still staying comfortable in conversations with my colleagues and friends, still being okay, not being, you know, removed from the group chats. Because I want to do it, but I don't want to do it in a really aggressive, bad way. So what would you recommend?
Yeah.
What would you say?
What a wonderful question. How to be a Ukrainian killjoy and still maintain some friends?
Olesya, would you answer that?
Oh, you guys can answer it too. While you're thinking, let's take another question and we'll come back to yours. Olia, over there. Yeah, no, we need a mic because we've got some online audience and we want them to hear you.
Hello, thank you very much.
That's another Ukrainian killjoy, by the way. Olia
Yes, another
Hercules from
killjoy.
BBC.
Another journalist. So actually I wanted to ask the same, but on top of that, I want to thank the honorable panel and Olia Hercules specifically, sorry Olesya. And because recently I met some new British friends, and the first question they asked me when they found out that I was Ukrainian, I'm Ukrainian, they asked me, oh, do you know Olia Hercules? She writes such amazing Ukrainian recipes. So definitely there is something which people know positive about Ukraine now due to your book, and thank you so much for that. And my question is, what is that recipe which you are getting the most questions about from your book?
Oh, that's a nice, easy question. It's a literal recipe. Like what recipe people cook the most or something, or
what dish? Maybe.
What dish they love the most? I think borscht. It's like with not even joking, like borscht. I've seen borscht being cooked in Thailand, in Australia, in America, in South America, in Chile, like you name it. Borscht is being cooked all over the world. People really connect with it. I don't know why, maybe because it's just really amazing, or maybe I talk about it more than other dishes, I don't know. But I think the first image that came into my head from like Instagram reposting other people's recipes that they make is borscht, I think. And that really makes me feel like I've accomplished something. So it's been amazing.
Absolutely. Felicity, do you have any advice to the previous question? I mean, we've just been talking about how difficult it is to pitch Ukrainian stories now, and you do this every day.
Yeah, I mean, I work, in my day job, I work for a national news television programme where I've been for 36 years. But I have no influence whatsoever on what they run, unfortunately, despite my longevity. The good thing about having written a book is that I can go to magazines and newspapers with my own stories. That's still very difficult because people will say to you, oh, we already did a Ukraine story last week, as if there's only one. You know, you're like, well, okay, well, there could be more than one. So what I decided to do was just to go, when I'm in Ukraine, I try to find more stories, meet more people that have something compelling that I can then come back and say, you need to know about this person. So, for instance, one of the guys in the book, and you've got his chocolate here, Olesya Khromeychuk, who runs Meaty Chocolate in Khromeychuk. So I interviewed him for the book as just part of a story about how small businesses were coping with the electricity blackouts and all the other difficulties that everyone faces, but also trying to run a business in this scenario. And then after I kept in touch with him, really nice guy, and I then discovered that he had joined an air defense unit as a volunteer in Kyiv. And I thought, wow, this is like okay, I need to tell that story about how he's still trying to run the family business. And then at night and at the weekend, he's in uniform and he's on the roof shooting at drones. So I spent some time with him at the position and then managed to get an article after some persuasion. But they really, you know, they were really happy. Once they picked up the phone and listened to the phone call, then they were like, the Observer were, yes, definitely, we really want this story. So I think it's when you have something to say that's a bit different and that people can like, wow, I didn't know that. So I try to do that as well with my Substack, is just like go through, think of something which people might not, most things people don't know about in the UK. They think you can fly to Kyiv, or they say, where do you stay? And they have hotels. Like there's a lot of knowledge gap, which is quite, it's quite satisfying to kind of be able to fill some of that. But I think in the way of telling stories about people or coming to them with something which they can relate to or they can really be interested in on a personal level, that's the answer.
Veronica, was that your question? Yeah, it's hard. I'm quite lucky that I haven't had as many asshole colleagues as that, but it does happen. And my advice would be, like, this whole soft diplomacy works. I've kind of actually made a decision as soon as the full-scale invasion happened. I was like, I'm now going to repost pictures of bodies, I do repost pictures of broken buildings because people need to know. But I make sure that I also do the soft diplomacy thing, which is bullshit, really. It's like people should really just see what's happening and reconnect. But some people are just like, oh, we've got our own stuff going on. And, and I'm sure they do. Everybody's got something, like a parent dying or something else. Everybody's gone their own war and their own fight. And you don't know what's going on in that person's head. So my tactic has been, well, first of all, writing this book and getting the balance right, and I hope that I did get the balance right. So there's the darkness and the light, but also so, I don't know, don't shy away, like also tell him to have off. And maybe, keep doing what you're doing, but maybe then bring like a Ukrainian cake into the office or something like that. I don't know, maybe it's a romanticized version of it, but I don't know. It works for me.
Yeah, it's a nice combination, absolutely. I mean, Olia allowed me to chip in as well. First of all, I don't have a problem being a Ukrainian killjoy. I think I've sort of grown into that role after so many years, even before the Russia's war in Ukraine. And the other thing that I always remember is patience. I'm not a terribly patient person, but I was with Serhiy Plokhy, Ukrainian historian, on a sort of quite a longish tour of Japan, and we gave talks together, and I watched him answer questions, and they were complicated questions like the NATO question, for instance, and I was ready to roll my eyes, and he was not, and he just patiently answered the same question over and over again, and I asked him, how do you do this, Serhiy? And he said, well, you see, it's 300th time for me that I hear this question, but it's the first one that person is asking. So, be patient with people and to the best of your ability. And the final advice is, of course, share culture. I mean, if we bring the books we love and we talk about them with enthusiasm and we describe just how wonderful it is and what a pity it is that more people don't know about it. And now we're having more and more books in translation, in English translation, in other languages available, so we can make those meaningful gifts to our contacts. I do believe that the more people we speak to, share stories, human stories, the more they will pass that information on and it'll work.
And the personal story always trumps the headlines. So maybe instead of like just regurgitating another headline that means nothing to them, just say something.
I feel very frustrated. I mean, I work on the news and I can't tell you how frustrating it is when they won't run stories about Ukraine. I don't have enough control, unfortunately, to make it happen. I try every day, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, but unfortunately it's just a question of people's resources and their bandwidth. Absolutely. But I just keep plugging away, and then yesterday I threatened to withhold the cake unless they covered Dnipro.
What a threat.
I know.
Did it work?
No.
We've circled back to the beginning, the question of food. We certainly wouldn't want to have any of our wonderful food wasted, so we will encourage you to finish what's there, and if you haven't had any, please make sure you do. It's delicious. But before we continue with our program, please join me in thanking Olia Hercules and Felicity Spector.